everyone. It's Mr. Alsup coming to you again from my incredibly comfortable living room studio. Last week, we took ourselves on a little adventure with Charles Darwin and talked a little bit about some of the ideas that he had, some of the things that he thought were important, including a big idea called natural selection, which eventually we would come to know as evolution. Now, evolution, as you remember from last week, is just a change in something over time. Sometimes it's animals, sometimes it's ideas, sometimes it's cell phones. Evolution is any change that happens to anything over time. Now, what we're really concerned with on the science side, though, is more about the changes that can happen to animals and plants and other living things over time. And Charles Darwin knew a little bit about that. He knew that things changed over time. He knew that they changed because of pressure from their environment, that Mother Nature did some selecting, and that she was looking at what kinds of things were going to be able to give those animals and plants the best chance to survive in their environment. And so that's what Charles Darwin's natural selection idea was, that nature was going to select, and that it was going to select things based on their fitness to survive in their environment. How well do they survive? Now, the thing that Charles Darwin didn't really know was how this actually happened. I mean, he knew it happened, but he didn't really know how. He didn't really spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out how did this happen. He just knew it happened, and he wrote about it, and he told us all about it. And it just goes to show that sometimes in science, you don't always have to have the whole story. Sometimes what you contribute, even if you think it's something relatively minor, can be a part of a much bigger picture once other people start to figure out all of the little things that fill it in. So we're going to meet today another scientist who helped figure out some of the things to help fill in what Charles Darwin was talking about. So, what we're going to talk about today is a concept called genetics. It involves something called genes, which we're going to talk a little bit about, and we're going to talk a little bit about what they do and how they work and all of that sort of stuff. When we talk about genetics, the guy that we're usually accustomed to talking about is this guy. This is Gregor Mendel. He was born under a different name. His original name was Johann. And when he was born, he was a young kid. He was the son of a farmer. His dad was a farmer. They didn't have very much money. He grew up on the farm, and he really was only going to be able to go to school for the portion of school that was free. And then when he was growing up, there was a portion of school, basically what we would equate to like being grade school, that you could go to for free. But when you wanted to go to high school, you had to really pay up some money in order to be able to go to school and get your education. And so Gregor, when he got ready to go to high school, his parents just didn't have enough money. So his sister offered to lend him the money from her dowry. Now, back then, women had dowries, and dowries were designed to pay their basically their husbands, their future husbands, so that the brides would have some money and some goods to bring with them to the marriage. Now, Gregor's sister took this really selfless step of saying, you know what? I will give you that money that mom and dad have set aside for me so that I can eventually find a husband. And in return, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay with mom and dad and take care of them into their old age. So I'm going to stay at home and basically live with mom and dad for the rest of my life and take care of them. And I'm doing that for you, my brother, so that you can go out and make something of yourself. Because she felt like young Gregor really had the makings of a great scientist in him. She knew that there was something great about him. And so she did that. She made that sacrifice for him, and he went out into the world. He went to college eventually, but again, he couldn't pay for college. So when it came time for him to go to college, he actually became a monk which is a religious order where you join this religious order, you dedicate your life basically to your religion, and in return for dedicating your life for your religion and giving up all of your worldly possessions, they give you a place to live. But in the case of Gregor, they also gave him the money so that he could go to college, so that he could be an even better monk than what he was when he got there. And in particular, what they wanted Gregor to become was a teacher. Now, Gregor went to school to become a teacher. He learned all about biology, learned all about science, did all kinds of really cool things. But when it came time for him to actually go out and teach kids, he wasn't very good at it. He did not do a very good job at teaching kids. He worked for a while as a substitute teacher, but every time he tried to take his teacher exam, he failed it. And he failed it twice in a row. And then the monks said, maybe you're just not cut out for this. And they invited him to come back to the monastery and work there at the monastery. And they said, we've got a nice job for you out in the garden at the monastery. And you can think about, things a little bit and kind of try to get yourself back together a little. Gregor didn't really let himself get too affected by this. And he threw himself right into his gardening, just like you would expect. Now, what I hope this teaches you a little bit by learning about his life, because remember, all scientists are humans, is that you don't always have to know exactly what it is you're going to do with your life. You don't always have to be just one thing. Gregor was a farmer. He was a monk. He was a teacher. He did all sorts of different things. Don't let the idea that, oh, you have to be one thing, and if you're not that one thing, you failed somehow at life. That's not the right thought process to have as a scientist. So many scientists have failed at so many other things before becoming scientists, and so many scientists who failed at being scientists went on to do other great things. And there's nothing to say you can't be great at both science and something else. Witness this gentleman right here. This gentleman right here is, of course, Neil deGrasse Tyson, because you all know that because you watch PBS, and PBS is great, and it has a lot of really cool things with Neil deGrasse Tyson. But you may not know that Neil deGrasse Tyson was actually an amateur wrestler. He wrestled when he was in high school, wrestled when he was in college. You may not know that he was also a competitive dancer. He danced when he was in high school, danced when he was in college, and then he went on to become an astrophysicist. So here you have Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an astrophysicist, dancer, wrestler, scientist. You can be more than one thing. There are scientists out there who are circus performers and also scientists. There are scientists out there who are neurobiologists who are also actors. There are all sorts of scientists out there who do other things besides just science. So when you're in school and you're taking science and you're like, science is my favorite class, it's all I want to do, think about all those scientists out there who do other things, who have other things that they're interested in besides just science. And they have other interests and other hobbies and even other complete careers besides science. And it's perfectly okay because you can be more than one thing and you can do more than one thing and be successful at them. Now, Greg was like that. Gregor went back to school. He went back to work at the monastery. And when he got back to work at the monastery, they put him in charge of all of the plants that were in the garden in the monastery. And he would later come to be known as the father of modern genetics. Because when he was out in the garden, he noticed something really interesting about the pea plants. This isn't the only thing he noticed about them, but it was the first thing that he noticed about them. He noticed that there was a trait. Now, a trait is just simply something that you can observe about an organism. We also, in science, we call that a phenotype. And he noticed a trait in these pea plants, that some of these pea plants had purple flowers, and some of these pea plants had white flowers. And he was out in the garden looking at all the pea plants, and he was looking and he's like, interesting. Some of these have purple flowers, some of these have white flowers. I wonder if they're two different species of peas. I wonder if there are different kinds of plants. I wonder if there's other differences in pea plants that people don't really know a whole lot about. So he thought to himself, maybe I'll study this. Maybe I'll take my science knowledge and maybe I'll take a look at these pea plants and try to figure out what's going on with them. So he looked at the phenotypes of a lot of things in the pea plants, but we're just going to take a look at the flowers today. So he saw the purple flowers and he saw the white flowers, and he said, you know what? It would look really cool next year if I could make this garden so that all of the purple flowers are on one side of the garden and all of the white flowers are on the other side of the garden. So he went around and put little labels next to all the plants that told him what color their flowers were. Now, that took a while because there were a lot of pea plants in his garden, and he had to spend a lot of time checking them over to see what kind of flowers they had. And sometimes he had to wait for days, even weeks, for the flowers to come out so that he could look at them and find out what kind of flowers were on these pea plants. Then, later on in the season, he would collect all of the pea pods. Now, some of those pea pods, when you open them up, you're going to eat them, right? We're going to eat the peas. We're going to make soup out of them. We're going to put them on our salads. We're going to do all kinds of wonderful things with these pea plants. But some of those peas you have to keep and dry out so that you can plant them next year, because the peas that are in those pea pods are actually the seeds of those pea plants. That's how those pea plants make more pea plants. So he looked at all those pea plants and he said, well, let me get the seeds off of the purple ones. Let me get the seeds off of the white ones. And he made 2 baskets. One basket full of purple seeds, one basket full of white seeds. And he put those 2 baskets in a nice place so they would dry out. And he kept them really nice and safe over the winter time. And then the next spring, when it came time to plant the peas, he planted his garden just like this. He said, I've got all the purple ones here, all the white ones here. This is going to look great when we go and we get our flowers, because it's just going to be, nice, harmonious garden. But what happened surprised him a little bit, because when he got out and the flowers started coming out on the plants, the side of the garden that was supposed to be all purple had a couple of white plants in it. And he said, well, that's not right. I wonder if I made a mistake. Because as scientists, that's what we always think. Well, I must have goofed somewhere. I must have taken some of the wrong seeds. I'm pretty sure I did it right, but I could have messed up. As a scientist, that has to be something you're willing to say to yourself. You always have to be willing to say, I might have messed this up, so let me try it again. So this year he did the same thing. He labeled all of the plants. He got his stuff together so that he could take all of the peas. He took all of those peas from the purple plants, put them in one basket, took all of the peas from the white plants, put them into another basket. And then he put them away for the winter. And he got ready for the next year when he could plant those peas again and see what would happen. And he planted the peas again, and he got the same results. There were still some white ones showing up with the purple ones, but the white ones always stayed the same. Like the white plants always seemed to continue to have white plants, white flowers on their plants. So he knew there was something going on here, and he thought about it, and he thought about it. He said, there is something going on with this trait. This trait seems to have 2 possibilities, either purple or white. And he starts thinking to himself, those 2 possibilities can't be random. If they were just random, then the white ones would have some purple ones in them. So there's something going on here that is not random. And he sat and he thought about it, and he thought about it, and he thought about it. And he realized that maybe what was going on here was that the purple trait was stronger than the white trait. It's a concept that in science we call dominance versus recessive. If something is dominant, it stands out, it's big, it's strong, and it gets out in front of that recessive trait. And the recessive trait just kind of hides in the background because it's small and it doesn't do much. And so the dominant traits show themselves more than the recessive traits do. And he thought to himself, if that purple trait was dominant, it could be hiding that white trait. And so if that purple trait dominant kind of hid that white trait recessive, that would make a lot of sense. Because when these things would breed with each other, even if the plant had that white trait, it wouldn't necessarily always show up. And then he got to thinking, and he was like, when we think about these plants, there's something else coming into the picture here. And that something else is the fact that these plants have two parents. They have a mother plant and a father plant that have made the little baby plant, have made the seeds, which are going to be the little baby plants eventually. And he's like, it would make a whole lot of sense if the mother contributed half and the father contributed half of a given trait. So he thought about it and he said, well, if the dominant trait is bigger and more expressed than the recessive trait, I'm going to label it with a large uppercase letter. And if the recessive trait is kind of a weaker trait and it hides behind that dominant trait, I'm going to label it with a lowercase letter. And he kind of thought that would be a nice way to kind of think about it, how one thing is dominant and another thing is recessive. Now, he didn't actually use letters for this. That came along a little later, and we'll talk about the guy who figured that out in a minute. But it's easier for us to think about this when we think about dominant being uppercase, recessive being lowercase. So if you think about mom and dad for these plants, there are three possibilities here for what their traits can look like. Mom's traits can either be dominant-dominant, dominant-recessive, or recessive-recessive. Dad's traits can either be dominant-dominant, dominant-recessive, or recessive-recessive. Now, when we look at it this way, we realize that these traits here with the two dominants together are always going to show that dominance. And these traits here with the two recessives, or with the recessive with the dominant, are always going to show the dominant. So these will be purple, these will be purple. These with the two recessives are the only ones that will be white. Now, when these plants start mating with each other, if you mate this purple here, or this purple here, with another purple, there is a chance that you will get dominant-dominant, there is a chance you will get dominant-recessive, and there is a chance that you might just get this recessive here together with this recessive here, which explained those white flowers that he got. So most of them would be purple, but some of them are going to show up white. And if you took these down here where we have the white-white, if you have white-white with white-white, and that's the only way you can have the white flowers, every time they breed together, the only thing in there is white. So the white plants are always going to what we call breed true. They are going to continue to produce more plants with white flowers. Whereas the purple plants with the purple flowers have a chance of producing plants with white flowers, but most of the time are going to produce purple flowers. And so this really created an interesting thing for him to think about. These things, the genes that are behind these, are called genotypes. And that's what we call these traits, these things that help to tell us what these traits are. We call them genes. And when we put them together and we look at the big B, or the big B, or the little b, these we call the genotype of a plant or of an animal. So we talked earlier about phenotypes. Phenotypes are the things you see, the things you observe. What's backing those up are the genotypes, the genes that are behind those, the actual genes that code for those traits. And that's something we'll get into maybe when we talk a little bit more about the nucleus of a cell. But the cell nucleus is where all of those genes are stored, and they're stored in your DNA. Now, talking about this, You've probably all realized it sounds really confusing. And how do you know what happens if you take a purple plant and say have it mate with a white plant? What's going to happen when a purple plant mates with a white plant? What's going to happen when two purple plants mate together? What's going to happen when two white plants mate together? When our friend here did that and started talking about that, he used those terms dominant and recessive. And he just talked about dominant dominant, dominant recessive, recessive recessive, and it was really hard to keep track of. It was really hard to kind of really figure out what he was talking about. So later on down the road, this gentleman came along. This is Reginald Punnett. Oh dear. For those of you who thought that you had a horrible middle name, Reginald Punnett just reminds us all that it could be a lot worse. Um, you could be named Reginald Crundle, whatever your last name is. Uh, his parents, evidently didn't really think about what they were dooming him to a life to once people at school found out his middle name. But Reginald Punnett was an amazing scientist, and he took what Gregor Mendel had done, and he figured out a way to display it so that we could make sense of it more easily. And the way he chose to do it was with this little thing that looked kind of like a window pane. What he did was he put mom's genes over here. And in this particular example, mom has a big B and a little b, and she's purple. And he put dad's genes up here. Dad has a big B and a little b because he's purple. Now, when you take that big B and put it with another big B, there is a chance that their kids could be big B, big B. There is a chance that if you take this big B from mom and put it with dad's little b, you could have a baby that's just like them, big B, little b. There is a chance if you take dad's big B here and drop it down to mom's little b here, you could end up right here with a flower that's purple and looks just like them with the big B and the little b. But there is also a chance that if you have this little b and this little b, and those two are the parts of mom and dad that get together, you could end up with a little b and get a white flower that doesn't look anything like mom or dad. Now, I'm sure some of you have that in your family. You probably have some people in your family that you can think of that look just like mom and dad. I know I look a lot like a lot of my relatives. But then every once in a while, you have someone that doesn't look anything like mom and dad. And you know that they're your brother or your sister, but you don't look anything like them. And you try to figure out, well, how did that happen? Is it a mystery? Did they really get dropped off by a stork? What was the case? Is it a Harry Potter situation? You don't know. But what's really going on there, most likely, is that the genes that are being expressed in them are being hidden in you, or maybe didn't even get to you. But those genes that are being expressed in them make them look different than mom and dad. So even though dad is purple and mom is purple, baby could be white flowered. And that's the amazingness behind how we have all of this stuff happening in evolution and overall with the main idea in natural selection, because these traits can be hidden in the population. They can be there behind things, you don't know they're there, and they can be hidden for many generations. But occasionally you're randomly going to get them to show up. And when they show up at random, if they're a good gene, then they're going to be more likely to get passed on. And if they're not such a good gene, then later on you're going to see that they'll disappear from that population. So let's try another one of these. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to make our own little Punnett square. And I'm going to do it by making a line. and then another line that's going across it like this. Okay. And then what we're going to do with those is we're going to come into here and we're going to put up on top, we're going to put a dad. Okay. And the dad on top, we're going to give him the big B genes, which means that dad here must be purple. Okay. Now we're going to take mom over here. And let's say that mom is a white flower. So she would have little b genes. And we want to know, well, what's going to happen when mom and dad get together and have some babies? So when we look at this, the big B gene here from dad is going to go with the little b gene here from mom, and that baby is going to have big B, little b. Over here, the big B gene from dad is going to go with the little b gene from mom, and it's going to be big B, little b. And down here, the big B gene with dad is going to go with the little b gene with mom, and it's going to be big B, little b. And up here, the big B gene from dad is going to go with the little b gene from mom, and we're going to get big B, little b again. Now, in this case, all of these kids are going to look exactly like dad. But hiding in there is a little bit of mom. Dad is purple. This guy is going to be purple because the big B is dominant, and dominant traits stand in front of those recessive traits and make it so you can't see them. Same thing here. This big B in here is going to make this flower purple, and this flower purple, and this flower purple. So even though mom is white and dad is purple, all of their babies are purple, and they look just like dad. But if one of these babies ever has offspring with another plant that carries that same little B in it, they could produce white flowered babies. So looking at this, it shows us just how easy it is for a trait like that to kind of hide right there in plain sight, right behind another bigger, more dominant trait. Now, this isn't always the way it works. Those of you who are in high school taking some of the biology stuff that we take in high school, we learn that there are some traits that are co-dominant, where these things kind of share dominance rather than one being dominant and one being recessive. But at the time, when Gregor Mendel was looking at this stuff, the things that he was looking at, the plants that he was seeing, really only had these dominant and recessive traits. So that's kind of all he knew. But what he did was give us the opportunity to build on what he figured out and to take that and go to the next step. And that, again, is what science is all about taking that first step and trusting that other scientists are going to follow up and follow on to your work and take the next step. I hope you had fun today. I will be back with you next Monday. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you again soon.